What's going on, everybody? It is Friday, November 26th. We are live on the pregame show. Number 11 Oregon is preparing to welcome the Oregon State Beavers to Autzen Stadium in Eugene Saturday afternoon, 12:35, approximately 12:35 p.m. kickoff time on ESPN. And there is a lot on the line for this one. We're looking at the winner is going to have a chance to go to the Pac-12 championship game in a really chaotic year. And it just goes to show you that you can't take any game for granted. I know that the Ducks were, they keep preaching the 1-0 mantra. And, it just shows you that they had to, how hard it is to, take care of business and get through that really tough stretch of games here in November. I'm joined by Ducks Digest reporter Dylan Reubenking on this live stream on our YouTube channel. Dylan, how we doing, man? How was your Thanksgiving?
It was great. I had 18 people at my house yesterday, including 6 kids under the age of 6. So I'm pretty worn out. Still pretty tired from yesterday. It was chaotic, but a lot of fun.
Awesome, man. So what's your favorite Thanksgiving food? I think that'd be a fun way to start the show.
For me personally, my mom makes this. We call it grandma's salad. My great grandma used to make this fluffy lime salad with like marshmallows and walnuts and like Jello mix. So, we have that every week or every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, and me and my grandpa we fight over it because like we both eat the hell out of it. So that's usually my favorite. But can't go wrong with dark meat turkey either.
Right on. It sounds like you had some good options in the Reubenking household. I've always been a mashed potatoes kind of guy. That's always my go-to for Thanksgiving. So hope everybody had a great holiday. Maybe have some food hangover and you're tuning into the live stream with some leftovers. But let's talk some Ducks. Oregon State. Historically, it really hasn't been, too much of a game for the Ducks. I feel like in the past they've really handled it, pretty easily, and then no one's super intimidated about this game. But man, 2021, here we are, and the Beavs are coming to Eugene with a full head of steam, 7-4, 5-3 in the Pac-12 under Jonathan Smith, coming off that 24-10 win over the ASU Sun Devils. And they're looking hot, Dylan. I mean, what are some early thoughts for you just on this matchup?
Yeah, I think the big thing going into this one is Oregon State's defense, which is never something that we, usually highlight talking about an Oregon State team because they went through, a defensive coordinator firing in the middle of the season. I think it was after week 9. And then the last 2 weeks against Stanford and Arizona State, they've only given up a combined 24 points, and they haven't given up 300 yards of offense in either of those. So, obviously, Oregon's offense is a different beast. Arizona State does a lot of similar things, but Oregon's offense has been, aside from the Utah game, rolling, and they're at home, so you kind of expect it to be better at home. But the way this Oregon State defense is playing, like you have to think that they're going to be ready for, this Oregon offense going after a quarterback like Jaden Daniels, who Jonathan Smith talked about is very similar to Anthony Brown. They have a run game very similar with Rashad White and Trainum. With Travis Dye and Cardwell. So I think it's going to be a really fun matchup. They're a very physical defense. The linebackers are really, really good. Secondary's playing better, but, still kind of middle of the pack. And then offensively, they're not known for, throwing the ball super well. Chance Nolan, I think, has done a good job overall. But, BJ Baylor has just been phenomenal. And you talk about, he's got 1,200 yards, leads the Pac-12. He's just been, solid all season long. So it's going to be a tough test for Oregon.
I think when we're looking at that Arizona State win for the Beavs, I think it really comes at a good time for them going against a quarterback like Jaden Daniels, a guy who is really mobile, likes to get out of the pocket and run the ball. And then you look at Anthony Brown this week, and he's done most of his damage on the ground this year. So I think that prepared them at a good time to face a guy like Anthony Brown. And then just some numbers for that Oregon State defense. The passing defense is averaging 238 yards per game. Opponents, I should say, Oregon State opponents are averaging 238 yards per game. That is 8th in the Pac-12. And then the run defense is very middle of the road, 139 yards per game, 6th in the Pac-12. So Ducks definitely have an opportunity to really exploit, a couple different areas of this Oregon State defense. they got some good pass rush, some good pressure on Jaden Daniels in that game last week. So the Ducks offensive line, I should say, is looking to bounce back. The whole team's looking to bounce back, but they've just got blown up at the line of scrimmage. And then Cameron Rising, for the most part, had his plenty of time to operate in the pocket there against the Ducks. So I think my take on this, I guess, it seems like we're kind of just starting off talking about the Oregon offense against the Oregon State defense. They just can't let them, exploit how one-dimensional this offense has been. They got to establish the run early, and if they can't do that, I think they're in for a long day. I know that their secondary hasn't been too great, and that they are exploitable in the pass game, but that obviously hasn't been a strength for this Oregon team all year. And I think with the way everything has transpired at wide receiver, I'm excited to see these young guys, but with injuries to Johnny Johnson and Jalen Redd, and then Micah Pittman leaving the program, it obviously isn't the ideal time, when the games matter the most here at the end of the season to be, putting these guys in a bigger role. But it's an opportunity for them that I'm sure they're savoring, to show this is why I was, a big name coming out of high school. This is an opportunity for me to shine. I know a lot of guys coming to college want the opportunity to play early. And, guys like Troy Franklin, Dante Thornton, Chris Hudson, they're gonna be big for the Ducks in this one.
Yeah, and they were, who we were talking about ahead of the Utah game last week because of the injuries. And you talked about Oregon State's secondary. They've given up a lot of really big plays throughout the season, especially early in the year. Not so much the last couple of weeks. They've been better doing that. But, like you said, I think they are exploitable. I think they have their vulnerabilities. But I think Jonathan Smith and that defensive staff, they're definitely going to take a look at how Utah defended Oregon in that game, because I remember seeing a clip all over Twitter where, Utah was playing kind of semi-deep, and then Oregon's receivers, they were just letting them go past them, and they were just kind of hanging around in the middle of the field and just kind of testing, Anthony Brown to throw the ball deep. And, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw that kind of same look, that same scheme, this week from Oregon State. But, Anthony Brown, he did make a couple deep throws, more so than what we've seen throughout the season. And I think that's really going to have to come through against this Oregon State secondary.
I know that the secondary for OSU has some pretty good names. Rajon Wright is one of the more experienced defensive backs. We're going to be looking at him 6'2" for a defensive back. He's going to be big to match up against Oregon's wide receivers. You look at Devin Williams and Dante Thornton, both 6'5" wide receivers. So I think that would give me a little bit of confidence, if I'm looking at the Oregon passing attack, just having that height advantage. I feel like when you have that height advantage, you have a little bit of a bigger margin for error. But I want to see this Oregon offense get the guys the ball in space, because they're some really electric playmakers, and they can only do so much if you're getting them the ball at the top of the route, and they're facing some heavy defensive coverage from these DBs. So I think that'll be pretty big to look at here. And then Jaden Grant was a guy that I know you highlighted in your players to watch story, Dylan. He's a guy who's real versatile. It was pretty late in the high school football, scene. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about him and kind of how you think he'll factor into this game for the Beavers defense.
Yeah, I mean, he's come on really well. He only came into the football scene, into the recruiting scene, his senior year of high school. And he asked the football coach, like, hey, what would it take for me to join the team? And, they got him on board, and he played, I think he said, the 4th or 5th week of his senior year, and they ended up going to the state championship. He played like 10 games and, went on to Oregon State, and he's played really, really well. He's number 3 on their team in tackles with 56. He's got a couple of interceptions, 5 pass breakups. Like, he's been probably their best defensive back this season. And, he's a local guy, Westland guy, from the Portland area. So, and he's played against this Oregon team before. I believe he had an interception last season against Tyler Shuck in that win in Corvallis. So, yeah, he's got experience against, going against some of these receivers. But the one thing that I noticed when kind of looking at the Arizona State, tape was how long and tall the Oregon State secondary is. Like, they were matching up pretty well with Arizona State, who has a few, really tall receivers too. So, they're all in like the 6'1" to 6'2" range. So, I think Oregon State secondary will match up size-wise better than most teams will with Oregon's receivers, but I do want to see them get, Devin Williams the ball in space, like you said, Dante Thornton and the tight ends. We talked about it last week in the postgame show. Those guys have size, speed, athleticism. Like, I want to see them more involved. I think they have kind of been almost a forgotten part of the offense in terms of the passing game. They've done a great job in blocking for the most part, but I want to see what they can do with the ball in their hands.
You talk about the tight ends, Dylan. Tight end DJ Johnson is questionable for this game against Oregon State. That's coming from our latest injury update story. Linebacker Keith Brown looks like he's going to be out in this one. Got some folks joining the stream. Thanks you guys for stopping on by. Go ahead and ask us some questions in the comments section so we can get this show rolling a little bit more. I want to see what's on your guys' mind, what thoughts you have ahead of kickoff tomorrow, looking at 12:35. That's one of the reasons we're doing the pregame show early, is that, I feel like a lot of people probably won't be up. They'll be heading to the game, and we want to get all of our thoughts out right now. So I like what you said about the tight ends. They really haven't been involved too much, Dylan. And then just, for this offensive approach, you don't want to overcomplicate things. This isn't really the time to pull out all the stops. I think you go back to what was working for you. But, man, if they can't get the ball rolling on the ground, then I definitely think that there's some cause for concern there. We were talking before we hit record here about that Oregon State-Arizona State game last week, how Arizona State got in that 14-0 hole and they weren't able to climb out of it. Oregon State had a little bit of a mishap on special teams, which kind of gave the Sun Devils some life. But the Oregon offense hasn't been too great at starting fast this season. They've had a couple games here and there. You look at that Washington State game recently, they got out to that 14-0 lead. Colorado, they started hot, but it hasn't been a calling card for them. So I think that, you got to come out and start strong with this one, get the ball rolling. And I mean, you have an opportunity to push the ball down the field a little bit more. So that was one of the weird parts from last week. Like you were talking about how we saw Anthony Brown pushing the ball down the field more, but ultimately it was a pretty rough day for that offense overall.
Yeah, and you think about last year's game, both teams were starting out hot. Like Oregon, they went down the field right away, and then Oregon State was answering, every call. And I think that this game could be very, very similar to that. The last time these two teams played at Autzen Stadium was 2019. That was a really low-scoring defensive physical game. It was super cold. Neither offense could really get going. I don't think we're going to see something like that. I think we're going to see kind of a high-scoring shootout, kind of like what we thought we were going to see with the Utah game. I think we're going to see that more so this week. But yeah, I think Anthony Brown, he has to get the ball out quicker, and he has to get the ball, into space. Not so much like the check down stuff that he's kind of been reliant on this year, but he's been throwing into some tighter windows than usual. That Utah game especially, he was trying to force throws that you wouldn't usually see him try to make. So I think just making his reads, obviously the offensive line giving him time is a big thing too. But, just making the throws that he needs to make and on time and on target. I think it's been something we've talked about all season long with his, accuracy and timing and all that stuff. I just think he needs to kind of slow down a little bit more so than he did last week, because it definitely seemed like he was rattled a bit, especially in that second quarter when Utah started bringing pressure from all over the place.
A big part of making sure that he settles in is going to be that offensive line coming to play. And, I think a big reason probably that he, didn't play the best was because he was taking a lot of hits. So that Utah defense was bringing the pressure, like you mentioned. So they gotta give Anthony Brown some time to throw, some time to operate, and just get him in a groove early on. I think that goes right along with the passing game and how well that they're playing there. I think just another storyline kind of going into this game, Dylan, is it's a culture test for Mario Cristobal and these Ducks. We were talking about that. I think there's kind of been a bunch of different moments throughout the season. One of the ones I like to think back to is after that Ohio State win, I was asking Mario, how are you guys going to come out this week? How big is that for you? Winning a huge game and then having, your biggest, softball game on the schedule, right, against Stony Brook. And he was saying that's going to go a long way in determining how we are this season, what the trajectory of this team is. And we definitely know at this point that Ohio State win was not indicative of how this season was going to go. They faced some adversity and they've been resilient at times. That Stanford game obviously wasn't one that they want to rewind and look at too often here, but you got another loss that you're coming off of, and it was really, really bad. So, it's going to be a mentality test as well. Is this team going to be able to come out and they're, like Mario said, and the players have said, there's still a lot on the line, and come out and hopefully stamp your ticket to the Pac-12 championship game, and maybe get out to the Rose Bowl as well. I think that's a pretty good season if you can make those things happen. So that was just another storyline that I kind of wanted to bring up here. Just how does this team respond to getting punched in the mouth and getting blown out like that? But they've been playing well at home, so I think that gives me a little bit of confidence there.
Yeah, I definitely think playing at home is going to give them quite a bit of an advantage. And speaking from experience from the 2019 game, I mean, Oregon State fans are going to show up too, so they're going to make noise. They're going to be loud. So they'll definitely still have some noise to deal with on that side too. But yeah, the culture test I think is a big, I think it's a really good way to word it. The Ohio State game, I feel like that kind of was sort of, it got a lot of people's hopes up, and for good reason, right? That's a really good Ohio State team. Obviously, they haven't lost since. They've been, blowing everybody out. The Michigan State game, you saw how good they can be. So obviously, beating a team like that on the road, I mean, that's not, something to take lightly. But it feels like since then, it feels like the standard for Oregon was really as high as it's ever been. Because in recent years, when has an Oregon team ever gotten a win like that to start the season? So, we talked about the national championship standards, and we talked about, what the standard should be for this program. It shouldn't just be Pac-12 championships and the Rose Bowl, but at the same time, taking care of business, beating your rival at home, then taking care of the conference, in Vegas in prime time, and then going on to win the granddaddy of them all. I mean, that's nothing to sneeze at all. So I think being able to bounce back and still take care of the business you need to take care of, not just for the pride of your program, but for recruiting and all that stuff too. It says a lot.
That's another great point you bring up, Dylan. Recruiting. This is the Ducks' last chance to host visitors in Eugene, be in that Autzen game day environment. Some guys that are coming to town, just off the top of my head, we got Cyrus Moss. He's a major Oregon target left in this 2022 class. I'd say he's right up there as the priority target. Like, this team needs a pass rusher to come in after Kayvon Thibodeau declares for the draft. And I think that Moss has been, in that fold for a while. You look at David Bailey, modern day linebacker. He's supposed to be coming into town for this game. And let's see, I think we got RJ Jones, 2023 safety out of St. John Bosco, that is also there. Josh Connerly, 5-star offensive lineman. So there's a lot of big names. I'm working on maybe getting a visitor list story if I can, stack up enough names to go with this. But another part of tomorrow's game is the senior day ceremonies, which is going to be going down before kickoff. One of the big names to watch there is Travis Dye, who said he's probably not going to be taking part in the senior day ceremonies. But he's a name that we're going to need to keep an eye on as far as just what his NFL draft decision is. Alex Forsythe reiterating this week that he's going to be back next year. So that is huge for this offense, and whoever ends up being the quarterback next year, looking at likely Ty Thompson, having a guy that's experienced to start out with. But the senior day ceremony should be another cool part, of the festivities tomorrow. But before we move on to talking about the Oregon defense and the Oregon State offense, I'm kind of just wondering, are there any other points do you think we should talk about here, dealing with regards to kind of what's going on with the Oregon offense and, what Oregon State's bringing to the table on defense?
Yeah, I think Oregon State's going to bring a lot of pressure. I think they're going to, kind of show a lot of different looks. I think they, with in terms of the linebackers I mentioned earlier, if they don't have Avery Roberts, who has been their leader the last couple of years, then that's going to be a huge loss. I mean, he's, I think, top 10 in the country in tackles, leads the team by far, leads the Pac-12 by far in tackles. So that's going to be a big loss. But the name to watch if he's not able to go is Kyrie Morris. That guy played really, really well against Arizona State. So, Avery Roberts has been, a guy that has faced this Oregon team a few times. He obviously was a part of the win last year, played really well in that game. So, it's going to hurt for him not to be able to be out there because he's their emotional leader, their vocal leader on that defense. But I think this coaching staff, the Oregon State coaching staff rather, has a lot of faith in Kyrie Morris to step in at that spot if he's not able to go. But the defensive lines are really physical. The linebackers are physical, and the secondary is capable. But I think it has some holes that Oregon can definitely attack on Saturday.
Avery Roberts is going to be the main injury update to watch there, Dylan. I think that brings up a question that I have when I was editing one of your stories earlier today. I think you said Avery Roberts is one of, if not the best linebacker in the Pac-12. And from an Oregon perspective, you read that and you think, well, hey, has he forgotten about Noah Sewell? I mean, just if you could, I think it could be interesting to talk about just a little bit of a comparison between Roberts and Sewell, because I know Sewell is really well known for just being all over the field all the time, tackling machine, batting down passes, bull rushing. What maybe just paint the picture for us a little bit more about, just how important Roberts is and what his skill set kind of entails.
Yeah, I mean, he's, as good of a tackler as you're going to find at the linebacker spot or at any spot really in the Pac-12. There's not a lot of things when you look at him and his skill set, what he can't do on the football field. He does really well in coverage. He can rush the passer, get in the backfield. There's nothing necessarily that like pops off when you watch him. Like he's not this crazy edge rusher who will blow you away with speed and power. Like he just does everything very well and it has a complete package. And Noah Sewell obviously is an athletic freak. He's a guy who will, like you said, bat down passes, get into the backfield. He moves like a cat at 260 pounds at linebacker. Like the dude is an athletic freak of nature. But there are still some areas to improve. We've talked a lot about his coverage skills. There are some, I think he's taken some steps forward in that this year, but there's still a lot of room there. And he's only a sophomore. I mean, well, academically, he's only a sophomore.
Freshman.
Technically, yeah, second year athletic freshman. So, he's still got a long way to go, long career ahead of him, a lot of football. I think it just comes down to, with comparison, I think it comes down to Avery Roberts just having that experience and playing a lot of football and, just being out there so much. Like the dude is, up until this point where he got injured against Arizona State, he's, been a very durable guy. And so, I feel like saying the best linebacker in the Pac-12 in terms of production was kind of what I meant more.
Sure.
Just because, he's racked up like close to 300 career tackles, a lot of tackles for loss too. So Noah Sewell is right there in terms of talent. Like he might be number one in terms of talent.
All right. We got a couple comments here. Brandon, what's up, boys? Love your work. What's up, Brandon? Welcome to the show, man. Thanks for coming by. This isn't so much a question, but could be a cool point to get discussion going here a little bit. Coming from Chunky Monkey. Thanks for the comment. Every team we played and is going to play will bring their best game. The curse of being a top team. That's a good point. I mean, I think it just goes to show you again why you can't take any single game for granted, even against a team like Oregon State, which has really drastically changed. I think that they were looking like they were going to be neck and neck with Oregon for a majority of the season. After, they dropped that game against Purdue at the beginning of the year, and then they just looked really solid. And I believe they were one of the top offenses in the conference for a while now, dropped a couple tough games, but it's still right there for them. They want that Pac-12 title just as much as Oregon does. You talk about all the momentum that they have going into this game. 6-0, I believe it was, or 7-0, undefeated at home for the first time in quite a while in Corvallis. So that's really big. They want to close out the season. And I think our Dylan Mickaden tweeted that Jonathan Smith got a new contract, or at least that's in place. So, and as he should, right? They found their guy for sure. I mean, this Oregon State program has been the absolute doormat of the Pac-12 for the longest time, but it's a different year. And I think just to go back to this comment that the Ducks are going to get everybody's best shot. And that's kind of just what comes with how they've been playing and how everyone knows that they're the top dog in the Pac-12. And they look, for a top team in the Pac-12, it's hard to find someone that looks more vulnerable, especially coming off of a blowout loss. And that kind of just goes back to what we were talking about with the culture test.
Yeah, I think watching that Utah game, Oregon State was kind of just licking their chops at, all these things that Oregon wasn't doing very well against, obviously, a very good Utah team. But I think going back to the question of, or the comment about Oregon State bringing their best game and every team bringing their best, I think aside from Oregon being the top dog in the Pac-12 and, having this dominance in the last decade and just the national brand that they are, you just think of the rivalry itself. Oregon State is going to bring their best no matter the circumstances, whether one team is better than the others, if one's undefeated, one's, 1-11 or 1-10 coming in, it really doesn't matter. Like this game is always going to be both teams are going to bring their best, but you do bring into, the national championship hype, the college football playoff hype, all that stuff that comes around Oregon. Did you get to listen to Nick Saban's kind of rant on the radio show about that?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, so that's kind of what comes to my mind is, when you have the notoriety, especially in the Pacific Northwest, that Oregon does, where they've just kind of been dominant in the Pac-12 over the last decade plus. You know, like you said, everybody's going to bring their best when you know that this opponent is one of the best teams in the region and in the country. Usually, you have to bring your best against a team like that has so much talent, such great coaching. And they have the fans that they do at Autzen. That's a whole other thing. You have to bring your best when you have the whole crowd, going crazy. So you saw it with Arizona. You saw it with Cal. You saw it with Stony Brook. Like those teams didn't just, shut down and die against Oregon. Like they gave it their all for most of the game. Arizona, that game was close, when the crowd was singing shout, that was a close game up until the fourth quarter. So every team is going to give Oregon their best. And, you just have to take the wins as they come with Oregon. It's not everything's going to be a blowout like it was, in the Chip Kelly era where they were just running, 20 plays in 2 minutes. It's just not that era anymore. This is a much physical team, much more methodical team that's going to wear you down. So I think no matter what, Oregon should enjoy a win over their rival and, ride into the Pac-12 championship.
Another point that I think, you talk about that Saban conversation and how a lot of Bama fans aren't happy with these wins. It also just goes to show that I think that the depth on this Oregon team isn't where it needs to be to make that big push into the playoffs just yet. Their first line is obviously looking really good. They've been super banged up all year, so that has really shown us where the depth is kind of at. And even though Oregon's recruited at a super high level, you can't, just because someone's a super highly rated guy doesn't necessarily mean that they're ready to go, right out the gate as a true freshman. And I think something that I want to talk about, if we maybe just transition over to the defensive side of the ball for Oregon, obviously you guys feel free to leave us a comment or a question and we can jump back and forth between sides of the ball, whatever it is. But let's talk about Jamar Jefferson last year. This dude just ran crazy on the Oregon defense. Let's see the stats. We got 29 carries for 226 yards and 2 touchdowns. And if I'm looking at this from an Oregon angle, what's so frustrating is you knew that was what was going to happen. You knew that the run game was their bread and butter and that they really didn't have a lot of weapons. Tristan Gebbia isn't really, that impressive of a quarterback. So you knew that you had to shut down the run and they were just getting gashed left and right. And it's not the same story this year. I think Chance Nolan is probably an upgrade from Tristan Gebbia. Obviously, that's why he has the job. But you got to try to, that they're going to turn to the run this year. And it seems like it's a little hard to judge where Oregon's run defense is at right now, because heading into last week, they had the top run defense in the Pac-12, but then they go against Utah and they just, plowed right through them. So I think that was kind of one of the topics I wanted to bring up is just, obviously it's one thing to know what a team likes to do, and it's another to be able to take it away. But that just goes to talk about how important it's going to be to win the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball. But when we're talking about slowing down Oregon State, you got to stop that run or at least keep it in check.
I think a lot of credit goes to Oregon State's offensive line, especially in
they're
that
good.
game.
Real good.
Yeah, they're really good, really, really experienced. I was watching back that game from last year, and yeah, they were just creating some massive holes where, Jefferson wasn't even touched on a number of runs up until, he had already picked up like 20, 30 yards. So, Jamar Jefferson was just unbelievable in that game. And that was kind of the story of the defense last year. And a lot of concern coming into this year was the run defense, because they got gashed by UCLA and Demetric Felton. They got gashed by, like you said, Jefferson, Breece Hall in the Fiesta Bowl. This year, like, you haven't really seen teams rip off those long runs like you were seeing so much last year. Even with the injuries, like at linebacker, I think guys have stepped up in the run defense, no matter if they're a starter or a third string. They've done well for the most part. But BJ Baylor is as good as it gets in the Pac-12 in terms of production. He's been phenomenal in every game, been very consistent, and he's a guy that can rip off long runs like that. So, he and Deshaun Fenwick have been a really good duo all year. Now, Fenwick's a little bit banged up. I believe his status is questionable or doubtful. So we'll see if he's out there. They have another guy named Trey Lowe, who's their third string, who is another explosive back too, a bit more physical and bigger than Baylor is, I believe. But BJ Baylor is a guy that they have to take account for. He's also a very, very physical blocker. I believe he's 5'11", around 205. He takes guys on like anybody, any running back, any tight end would take on a guy. And then they have Jack Coletto. You have to talk about the hammer.
The
you have
hammer.
to talk about Jack Coletto. He's a guy who they've started to use a bit more. I believe he's got a touchdown in each of his last 3 games, and including that 47-yarder against Arizona State that took the college football Twitter world by storm last weekend. So he's a guy that they can use in goal line situations and short yardage situations. That touchdown was on a 4th and 2, just inside Arizona State territory. So he's a very versatile guy. They can use him in a lot of ways. He has a receiving touchdown too from the goal line. So he's a guy that Oregon's definitely going to have to try to figure out. I don't think anybody's really figured him out. It seems like they kind of get stunned when he's on the field and don't know how to defend a guy who's, a linebacker running the football. So, he's a guy to watch out for too. But I think this Oregon defense will be better fit to defend Oregon State's run game this year compared to last year.
You talked about that game last week against Utah where the Ducks faced a really loaded backfield. Tavion Thomas just did whatever he wanted, it felt like, and things aren't getting a whole lot easier against Oregon State when you talk about BJ Baylor, Deshaun Fenwick, if he's able to go. Trey Lowe is an in-state guy that Oregon fans would maybe know about. He went to Jesuit, and I believe he's related to Keenan Lowe, former Duck. So you kind of have the extra storyline there. But the point that I wanted to make with when you talk about Coletto, the hammer, I don't know if this is, a super accurate comparison, but for some reason when I was watching him, I couldn't help but think about Ryan Nall, former Beavers running back who had a similar build at 6'2", 237, just huge bruising back. And I think, with Coletto, he's just going to be a guy that they can bring in those situations when they know that they want to run the ball, but maybe it just kind of looks like they're going to assert their dominance in that way. I think back to how Stanford used to try out that jumbo formation, and they were basically screaming they were going to run the ball, just try and stop us. So that'll be something to watch as well. You look at guys like Popo Amavai and Jason Jones have improved this season a lot in defending the run. Brandon Dorlus and Kayvon Thibodeau. And you talk about that offensive line that the Beavers have. I mean, man, they're nasty. When I was watching that game, one of the guys that I wanted to highlight, let's see, it was number 68, Brandon Kipper, redshirt junior, 6'6", 310 from Idaho. They got some guys on that line, and it's just going to make BJ Baylor's job that much easier if these front 7 defenders can't, stuff those gaps, because BJ Baylor was running through some wide open holes last week against Arizona State. And I think it's going to go a long way if they can stop the run, because like we've kind of alluded to, I feel like the passing game isn't really that lethal for, Oregon State. It's not to say it's terrible, but at least statistically speaking, they're only averaging 204.5 yards per game, which is 11th in the conference. But they got some good guys at the receiving on the receiving end as well. Some good receivers that we can talk about. I feel like I'm jumping around a little bit, Dylan. So I don't remember where I wanted to go from there.
So I think going to Oregon State's receivers, the guy I highlighted in offensive players to watch story was Trayvon Bradford. He was a guy who had almost 100 yards last year against Oregon. Has played, I think he's in his 6th year, has played Oregon 5 times. It would be awesome, for him personally, I'm sure, to get a win at Autzen Stadium. And then Trayshawn Harrison is a guy who's really popped off recently, kind of a deep threat for Chance Nolan, a very, versatile route runner. He's got a lot of moves. So, and I believe he's a taller receiver for them as well. So, and they have, tight ends as well. Catoriano is a good tight end for them. So they do have some weapons. I think it's a much better passing offense than what Oregon faced last year. And I think Tristan Gebbia still put up some numbers, if I'm not mistaken, against that Oregon defense last year. But, kind of who didn't at that point in the season. Oregon's defense was really getting gashed all around by, in the middle of that season by, UCLA and Oregon State, and not so much by Cal, but they did, make some mistakes in that game as well. But Yeah, I think Chance Nolan is a guy that they should definitely look out for. We've seen him make some pretty big throws, some deep throws throughout the year. I think he's made some better decisions going down this season, but he can also use his legs and get out of the pocket. He's a mobile quarterback. So I think they have a lot to watch for all over the offense. But I think for the offensive line, going back to that, I think it was super impressive because Arizona State's defensive line has been really good all season long. They've been very good against the run, and Oregon State just absolutely mauled them all game long, especially in the first half when they got that 14-0 lead. So Nathan Eldridge is one guy I really want to point out. He's been just super good and super underrated. He was an all Pac-12 first team guy last year. Could very well do it again this year. I know Forsyth has been phenomenal, but the injuries, he hasn't played as much. So Eldridge, I think, is as good as it gets at the center position in the conference. Physical, just will, get to the second level, maul dudes, pancake dudes. Like, he's everything you want in a center in terms of pass protection and in the run blocking. So, yeah, Oregon State is one of the best offensive lines that Oregon is going to face this year. And, they're going to give it their all. They're a veteran group. They've got a bunch of, senior dudes, fifth-year dudes. So they definitely want to get that win at Austin Stadium.
That Oregon State offensive line up for the Joe Moore Award, awarded annually to the best offensive line in college football. So we know that they're a talented group. And I think this Oregon defense, you've got some question marks in the secondary that I think we could definitely talk about. You look at Verone McKinley, he got a little bit banged up and left that game against Utah last week. Mario Cristobal saying earlier this week that Verone is good. So it sounds like he'll be good to go for Oregon. He'll be available. But Steve Stevens will miss another game, and I think it'll be a whole month now that he's been out. He hasn't played since that Colorado game at the end of October. So, I mean, the Ducks had to shift some pieces around. You look at Trico's Bridges going back to safety during that game. Just their depth at safety is super, super thin after some of these injuries that they've had. You look at Bennett Williams as well. Damon David getting some action as a true freshman, but we'll have to see how that group kind of matches up, because I think that they have a chance to look pretty good against pedestrian passing attack. But like you said, they do have some good weapons. So I'll be interested to see how they respond from that Utah game when Britton Covey had a really good game. Keith, he had a really good game. The middle of the field was wide open, Dylan. So I'm sure that's got to be a big thing that they're going to want to look at here as they're preparing for Oregon State and kind of formulating their defensive game plan.
I think one guy I kind of want to see a little bit more is Brian Addison at safety. Now, I know he's, got less experience at the safety spot than some of the other guys, but, we've seen him before. He really played well. There were a couple times where kind of left some guys open, kind of missed his assignment a little bit, but, his size, you can't beat that at a defensive back position. He's 6'5", former receiver. He's got hands. So he's one guy that I've wanted to see for a little bit, especially with the injuries at safety. And if Verone is a little more banged up than we think, because we've seen it all season long. There have been times where a guy's injured kind of coming into a game, and then at the last second you see him in street clothes. So I don't feel like it's a guarantee that we see Verone McKinley based on just kind of past history with this season with some of the other guys who were thought to be good to go. So I expect him to go, but one guy I do want to see more of is Brian Addison, just to kind of see, because it is like you said, kind of a pedestrian pass attack from Oregon State. Still some weapons to keep an eye on though. But Brian Addison is a guy who I think, to kind of get him some more experience, I think this is the time to do it, because against, facing Utah potentially again in the Pac-12 championship, I don't know if that's the right time. A Rose Bowl or another bowl game, should Oregon lose to Utah again or Oregon State, I don't know if that's the right time to kind of throw him out there. I think this is a good time for him.
Well, I think that's been one of the tough things for this team to juggle this year is when do you make that decision? When is a good time to get some of these younger, more inexperienced guys, some good experience? And with Addison, to your point, Dylan, he's not a younger, inexperienced guy. He's been at Oregon for 3 seasons now. He's a class of 2018 guy, I believe. But just with the way that the season's gone, they've won so many games really closely that they haven't had that time to get some of the younger guys in and get them some valuable reps when the game is already decided. And I think that's what's so interesting in this discussion about, you think back to that Saban rant that went so viral and how some Oregon fans have been, displeased with the way that this team has won this year. I totally understand the point about winning games and you're not going to apologize for winning, but we can't move on and not acknowledge some of the drawbacks that come from winning so closely as you're not getting these young guys the reps that they need. And ultimately that's going to hurt you down the line. One guy that I think would be very appropriate in that conversation is linebacker Jackson LeDuc. We've heard a lot of good things about him. I believe he's been practicing for 2.5 weeks now heading into this game. That Oregon linebacker core is just taking a beating with injuries. So super, super good to have him back, just to have another option, especially with Keith Brown looking like he's going to be out in this one. But how do you find that right time to put him in if the game's still close? Obviously that's going to be a tough call for this defensive staff to make if they're, if the game's on the line and you got to put, and you're faced with that decision. Do I put a guy in there who's, like Jeffrey Bossa, for example? He's been rocking at linebacker for a majority of the season now, or do I go in and maybe give LeDuc some run? So I think that, even though he's been playing really well, it's going to be interesting to see kind of what they want to do there as far as managing his reps and how he'll be able to impact this one.
Yeah, I think this is a question, a very similar question that Mario Cristobal has kind of been asked at some point this year. And I think the thing that he would probably say is just, we're trying to, keep all the guys that we want, that we know will win games for us, that have the experience to win games for us. And, obviously I get that. But like you said, going into next year when some guys might leave for the league, some guys are graduating, like you want some guys who have some experience to kind of jump in there and just kind of right the ship, like with this season at the defensive line, you're talking about like Jordan Scott and Austin Foley leaving. You had guys that were experienced that stepped in because they had that experience backing them up. So, I think that's one thing that I've really wanted to see at some of those banged up spots, like linebacker. You haven't really seen, like you said, LeDuc. I don't know if we saw him against Utah. I don't remember. I don't believe he was out there. Secondary, they've had some mixing spots like Trikweze Bridges. Dante Manning obviously has gotten much more playing time than he did last year. So, but there are still guys that you really want to see. Damon David, I think, is a guy we're going to see some more through the end of the year, because I think the Oregon staff is starting to see what he can do. So I think he's a guy we'll see. But yeah, I think in terms of this conversation, I think most people will talk about the quarterback spot with, Ty Thompson. Do you want to get him, experience in case he's the guy for next year, which most people assume he is. And then just Anthony Brown has been the guy all year, except for a couple drives where Ty Thompson came in when, like you said, the game was kind of already decided. But, I think with defense, I think if this game is at some point decided, which I don't think it will be until probably the last couple drives, I think you're just going to see the starters, because who's going to win you football games and experience. And I think that's kind of been the mantra all year long.
Yeah, while you were saying that, I was looking at some of the stats from the Utah game, and LeDuc actually did play in that one, registered a solo tackle. But he'll be a valuable piece moving forward, especially because he's a guy that's been at Oregon and been at the college level for a bit now. We have a comment here that I was actually going to circle back to after this point, so I think it's a good time to bring it up. From Chunky Monkey again, thanks for the comment, man. Had to step away. Hopefully, you didn't miss the Seven McGee conversation. What are your thoughts on it? He could be a Renfro Edelman kind of guy for us. I think he's definitely a guy that I'm super excited about. You look at how the running back picture rather, has taken shape following that CJ Verdell injury. I think after Verdell went down, you had a lot of people that were excited to see some of these younger guys and what they had to offer. And now you're obviously looking at a 1-2 punch of Travis Dye and Byron Cardwell. Still really surprised that we haven't seen Trey Benson. But maybe that's much of Trey Benson, I should say. But maybe that's a separate conversation. Seven McGee, if you're talking about the organizational chart for this week and kind of how he's projected to make an impact, he's listed as the number 2 guy behind Chris Hudson at the H wide receiver spot. And Mario Cristobal had a lot of good things to say about him when he was asked about him, saying that he's spending a majority of his days now in practice with the wide receiver group. Has some really good hands. He's a quick guy, fast guy, real athletic. And I think that he's ready for this role because if you look at his high school tape, his coaches like to move him all around the field. And he's a guy that you just want to get the ball in his hands. It doesn't matter where he is. I think that was something that he said in fall camp, if I remember correctly, when we were talking to him, because there was a lot of talk about him, working as a slot kind of guy. And he was saying, just get me the ball. I don't really care where I'm at. And then he's also, I believe he's listed as the starting punt returner now following Mike Pittman's departure. So yeah, he's listed. It's a co-starter with Chris Hudson on special teams. But yeah, let's dive into this Seven McGee conversation. What are your thoughts, Dylan?
Yeah, I think he can be a guy who's kind of could kind of replace Jalen Red. Very similar size, both 5'9". Seven McGee's a little bit bigger, but we've seen him catch some passes. I think that Arizona game, he had one going up the sideline and made a really nice catch. It was a really good throw by Anthony Brown too. So I definitely think he's capable of being, that Hunter Renfrow, Julian Edelman kind of guy where get him in some short crossers, some reverses, throwing him in the flat. And I think he's a guy who can run some routes down the field too. I'd love to see it. In terms of the punt return, yeah, I think he's one of the best guys on the team in order to do that. I think Chris Hudson is another one, but Seven McGee's got speed. He's got power, 181 pounds. He plays a lot bigger than that.
Definitely.
But yeah, I think he's a guy who is going to excel at that spot, kind of playing in that slot receiver, that Jalen Red role. I'm really excited to see how they use him in this offense because they've used him in a lot of ways already this year. And I think if they put him in the backfield, if they still give him some carries, I think he's going to produce too because it's not like he's been any sort of a slouch in the run game. He's done pretty well when he's gotten the ball in his hands. But yeah, like you said, I think that 1-2 punch is pretty much cemented at this point with Travis Dye and Byron Cardwell. I would love to see Trey Benson still. I know we saw him early in the Pac-12 conference schedule, but I feel like there's something going on injury-wise maybe. But I think the way Oregon usually runs things, especially this year, it's just kind of been like, we know who we're going to win games with, like I said. And I think, they know what they have more so with Dye and Cardwell and now, using Seven McGee to his strengths too and where they need him.
He had some big plays out of the backfield, catching the ball earlier this season. So he's the kind of a guy that I think looks he's kind of like a spark plug. And you hear that phrase thrown around all the time, but man, this offense needs it. With a lot of guys banged up, you're kind of searching for some more playmakers. Chris Hudson had his best game of his Oregon career against Utah last week. So I think it was good to try to build off of that success that he had with Brown kind of getting into a groove there. But let's see. I think there was a little bit more on defense that I wanted to dive into. I mean, just the whole pass rush is obviously going to be super important. If you can get some hits on Chance Nolan, kind of rattle him a little bit, get KT in a groove, get a good game from Brandon Dorless, I think that'll be pretty big. Just as far as just getting some momentum, football is such a momentum game. It's going to be important for the Ducks to start early in this one, just to get some confidence back into that offense, because that was another thing we have to talk about, was just that the third down struggles last week against Utah. I think it was 11 of 14. It's just you got to be viewing this game as a clean slate, opportunity to end the regular season on a high note and hopefully clean up a lot of what went wrong in Salt Lake.
I think going into this Oregon State game, it's a pretty similar offensive line in terms of production. They paved the way for the run game and they protect the quarterback. Oregon State's only given up 10 sacks in 11 games this year. I believe Utah only had 10 going into that game as well last weekend. So, they're gonna protect Chance Nolan, and Chance Nolan is a guy who can make plays with his feet as well. Like I mentioned earlier, he can throw on the run. That's no problem for him. But like you said, I think this Oregon pass rush needs to be at its best. I think with momentum and the feel of the crowd, they usually play better, later in the game when the crowd's more into it. I think that, the second half, I think, is when typically Oregon's defensive pass rush has been at its best. Look at the Stanford game, the Cal game, UCLA. Like, it seems like they consistently show up around that late third quarter, early fourth quarter area. And we've wanted to see it all season long with, that being more consistent, not just, when they need it the most, which obviously is very important when they get it, when they need it. But against this offensive line that Oregon State's got, how physical and nasty and, just how well they can control dudes and move them. It's going to be a huge factor in this one.
And then we'll see how Adrian Jackson and Mace Funa can help out in that department. They've been some big guys to watch as well. Braden Swinson. I mean, it's just tough because there really hasn't been too much of a pass rush production aside from Thibodeau and Dorless this year. So I think that's going to be a major point in the offseason. But we don't need to start having those conversations just yet. Still potential. We got at least 2, maybe 3 more games if the Ducks can take care of business. We're wrapping up in just a second. So if you have any final questions or final thoughts that you want to throw in the chat, we'd love to address them. I'm just kind of thinking about any other big games that are going on right now. You had the Egg Bowl last night, battle for Mississippi, Ole Miss beating Mississippi State 31-21. And then we got the game, Ohio State and Michigan. That's Saturday morning, 9 a.m. on Fox. And then Pac-12 wise, you got the Apple Cup battle for Washington between Washington State and Washington. So we'll see how these teams can kind of wrap things up. They've both had some pretty wild seasons. Talk about coaching turnover at both schools, and then Washington really just looking for any shred of momentum to end this season. Another losing season for the Huskies, trying to get bowl. No, they can't get bowl eligible. That's not what I meant. But trying to get some kind of momentum in Seattle. I know that Oregon fans kind of like to laugh at what goes on in Seattle when things aren't going too well. But as far as the rest of the conference, Utah's got the Pac-12 South locked up. UCLA just totally blew the doors off of USC last week. So USC's got BYU, I think. And that'll be kind of an interesting game to watch because BYU's been playing really, really well. And I believe Oregon plays doesn't Oregon play BYU coming up here in the preseason, I want to say? I know they did for basketball, obviously, and that went pretty poorly.
I believe so, yeah. I think I believe it is at Autzen Stadium in 2022. I think it's the last game. It should be the last game before the Pac-12 slate begins, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's looking like it's that 2022 schedule. They got Georgia on September 3rd in Atlanta, and then Eastern Washington at Autzen and BYU. Let's see here. I think there was one more question that came up in the chat, so I just wanted to. Okay, yeah. Chunky Monkey's asking, love this platform you guys created. When's the next live show? Keep up the great work. Appreciate the kind words, man. I'm not sure if we're gonna do a post game show tomorrow yet. I'm trying to see what the afternoon kind of looks like. Because it's the last game of the season. I think I'm hanging with some of my housemates, but that's why I definitely wanted to get this show checked off before I head back to Eugene. Get back at midnight today, but this platform is real fun because it's cool to kind of just get on here with Dylan or some of the other writers that we have on the site, and then get your guys' input and have that direct interaction with you. See where your guys' heads at as the fan base goes. So. Not sure, Chunky Monkey, when the next live show is going to be, but we'll make sure to tweet it out and make sure everyone knows. If you're not following us already, go ahead and follow us on Twitter. Both our names there on your screen at mTorres Sports and at DRK Sports News. Also, check out the awesome stuff that Dylan's doing for the transfer portal. Maybe, Dylan, you want to just plug yourself before we wrap up here?
Yeah, so we're wrapping up all the regular season stuff with the transfer portal. Based on talks that we've had, we're going to have some pretty big stuff for bowl coverage and all that fun stuff. Going to be pretty busy over there once that starts. But so like you said, follow me on Twitter at DRK Sports News. I'm pumping out stuff for Ducks Digest all the time. And you can check out our work at tportalcfb on Twitter as well, and at thetransferportalcfb.com.
Right on. So for everyone watching, ask that you go ahead and subscribe to the channel, Oregon Football Max Torres. Completely free, and it only takes a second out of your day. Really trying to get more content going up on YouTube. And thank you guys for tuning in. Got Ducks Beavers Saturday 12:35 on ESPN. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you guys in the next show.